Alright, today we're going to be carving necks, or a neck. These are my standard neck carving tools that I will use on pretty much every guitar that I carve. The first one is a contour gauge, the second one is a half round file, with a handle of course. Then we have a mill file, half round again, about 12 inches long with the handle, followed by a smoothing file, or second cut, half round, a gouge, and then finally a 6-inch half round mill file. I pretty much use these tools to carve every neck. So moving right along here, we have a maple neck, and it's actually a really hard maple neck. It was my first carve of the day, so fun neck to warm up on. What I'm doing here is starting with the rasp, and I'm removing the cheeks or the corner of one side of the neck. I tend to, well, because of the placement of my vise on my bench, I tend to work towards the outside of the bench so I don't knock my knuckles on my bench if I get a little too rowdy with the rasp. This is me working in real time in this shot. The rest of the video is sped up quite a bit to kind of expedite the process, but I wanted to give you an example of how I move through carving the neck, and it's not clear because I'm moving so fast, but I'm using this sawing like motion and working in about thirds to remove material from this neck. The corners, once you remove the corners of the neck, you will see how easy it actually is to carve the neck. The corners are the toughest part. So what I'm doing here is removing the little corners around the heel of the neck and the volute. They tend to blow out, and I don't know if it's like a technique thing of mine with the way I throw my hand tools around, or if it's the nature of the wood. I mean, you're running into end grain at that point, but I found it very helpful to avoid blowing those corners out, to come through with the gouge and just clear them out, and it prevents a lot of hassle in reshaping and sort of redesigning things for sure. So I still have the rasp right here, and I'm starting to, now the corner or the cheek of the neck is pretty much removed, and I'm starting to shape it, moving closer towards the center. And right here I'll flip it around, carve the other side, and what I'm doing is I want to carve it to match. So I'm going to hit that corner, knock that corner off. Once I get that corner off, then I can start rounding it off into whatever neck shape I'm carving it to, whether I'm matching a neck for somebody or I am kind of doing what has become a standard carve for me. And there's so many different ways to describe a neck, and I don't think the language around neck shapes is really acclimated. So now I've moved on to a file, to my first cut file, and I am removing and rounding over the shape. I'm removing all the rasp marks, and the rasp marks are going to look really white, and you'll start to see even from this angle and distance that the neck starts to get more color as it becomes smoother. As I remove all the rough rasp marks, that first cut file will actually bring a lot of the yellow goldenish colors of the maple to the surface, and you can see it start to appear. And now what I'm doing is, since I have my rough shape in, I am checking it with my contour gauge and looking for any sort of unevenness and inconsistencies. The goal is to kind of create the shape mostly with the rasp, and then really refine the shape with the first file. So the mill file is going to refine the shape. One thing that I didn't mention before is when I'm taking longer strokes with the rasp or the file, I tend to use the flat side to remove more material, to have more surface area cutting. When I'm refining a shape, I'll use the round side, or if I'm coming up on the volute or the heel, I'll use the round side to have a little more control. So here I am checking with the contour gauge, once again looking for high and low spots. And this is something that you don't necessarily have. The more practice you have, the less you end up doing it. Um, but whenever I'm warming up, and usually I'm carving a few necks at a time, I like to be real repetitive with how I do things. I also time myself so that I can, make sure that I'm keeping a good pace. And I'll usually set a goal, like I want to have this done by lunchtime. Um, and I do this so that I can be more productive and more consistent with my work. And I sort of know what I'm up against or when I will be done with this. And I really make it a point to be done with carving the necks by a certain time. So right here the neck shape is pretty much finalized, and I'm looking for little high spots, and I've still got my mill file out. I haven't moved into the smoothing file, and with the smoothing file you're not necessarily removing as much material as with the mill file or the rasp, but you're erasing your mill file marks and really preparing the surface for final sanding. And if you do a good job with your mill file or with your second cut file, when you start sanding, you can literally start sanding at about 180 grit, sometimes even 220 grit if you're very patient. It all depends on the material, and it all depends on how consistent you are with your carve. Were you able to keep a nice straight barrel? Did you have to come back and kind of straighten out low spots? And when I do have to straighten out low spots, like in super figured necks or really soft and hard necks, usually I'll use a sanding block and on a really low grit, like a 80 grit, sometimes even a 60 grit, to kind of even out those surfaces. And in those cases, I'll just stick with the block after I've removed the most of the material with a rasp. I'll just stick with the block to carve the whole neck or shape the whole neck. But these are your basic neck carving. This is my basics to neck carving right here. Keep it really simple, and check the shape. Check it often once you get towards the end, and refine it as you go. And thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.